Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. The topology maps didn't match the terrain anymore. Benjamin Reeves stood at the junction of Alum Cave Trail and the unmarked service path, his Garmin Oregon 600 displaying coordinates that insisted he was standing 200 meters east of where his eyes told him he actually was. He'd checked the GPS 3 times, recalibrated twice, and even pulled up the satellite overlay on his phone. One bar of service, barely functional, but enough to confirm the impossibility. The trail he was looking at didn't exist on any map. Ben had worked Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 6 years, ever since finishing his master's in conservation biology at UT Knoxville. He knew these mountains the way other people knew their neighborhoods, every switchback, every creek crossing, every stand of Fraser fir struggling against the balsam woolly adelgid. The Smokies were his laboratory, his cathedral, his home. And now his maps were lying to him. It was mid-July 2015, the height of tourist season, and the heat pressed down like a physical weight despite the elevation. 4,000 feet up the Tennessee side, humidity thick enough to drink, the famous Smoky Mountain mist clinging to the ridgelines like something alive. Ben wiped sweat from his forehead, adjusted his Park Service baseball cap, and studied the Phantom Trail. It led northeast, into the backcountry between Mount LeConte and Clingman's Dome. Officially, that section was designated wilderness. No maintained trails, no camping permits issued, just dense forest and steep terrain that most hikers avoided. Unofficially, it was where Hannah Coleman had been heading when she disappeared 4 days ago. Ben pulled out the incident report he'd printed that morning. Hannah Coleman, 26, experienced backpacker from Asheville. Last seen by fellow hikers at the Boulevard Trail Junction on July 9th, heading toward what she'd described as an old Cherokee trail she'd read about in some historical survey. She'd been carrying a week's worth of supplies, a satellite phone that hadn't been turned on since that morning, and a journal where she'd apparently been documenting authentic Appalachian folklore sites. 3 other hikers had vanished in this section over the past 18 months, all experienced, all carrying proper gear and navigation equipment, all last seen heading into the same general area, following trails that weren't on official park maps. The search and rescue teams had found nothing. No gear, no bodies, no signs of struggle or accident. Just absence, as if the forest had swallowed them whole. Ben didn't believe in folklore. He believed in data, in patterns, in explanations that held up under scrutiny. People didn't just vanish. There were always reasons: falls, exposure, getting lost and dying of dehydration. The mountains were dangerous in mundane, predictable ways. You didn't need supernatural explanations when gravity and hypothermia did the job just fine. But the maps bothered him. Maps didn't lie. Cartography was science, empirical and verifiable. Yet here he stood, looking at a trail that his GPS insisted didn't exist, leading into wilderness where 4 people had disappeared following a pattern that made no statistical sense. Ben made a decision that would have horrified the park superintendent. He keyed his radio, a Motorola XPR 7550, the new digital system they'd just installed, and logged his position. Dispatch, Ranger Reeves. I'm following a possible trail at coordinates north 35 degree 3742, west 83 degree 2618. Investigating Coleman disappearance. Check-in scheduled for 1800 hours. Marie's voice came back scratchy despite the digital clarity. She worked dispatch for both voyagers up north and rotated down here in summer, something about preferring variety. Copy that, Ben. You sure about going in solo? That's pretty deep backcountry. I've got full kit and 7 years of mountain experience. I'll be fine. He didn't mention the map discrepancy. Didn't mention that he was following a trail that officially didn't exist. If I don't check in by 1800, send SR to these coordinates. Stay safe, Ben. Weather's supposed to turn nasty around sunset. He signed off and started up the Phantom Trail. The path was clear enough. Game trail probably, or maybe something older. The Cherokee had been in these mountains for centuries before the park existed, before the white settlers came. They'd had names for these ridges and hollows, stories about what lived in the deep places. Ben didn't believe in stories, but he believed in missing people, and he believed in finding them. The trail climbed steeply through old-growth forest, tulip, poplar, and oak. Some of the trees 4 feet across, survivors from before the logging era. The canopy was dense enough to block most of the sun, creating a green twilight that should have been cooler but somehow wasn't. The heat seemed to intensify as he climbed, as if he was walking into an oven rather than up a mountain. His scientific mind cataloged anomalies. The bird sounds were wrong. Too few species, too quiet for July. The undergrowth showed signs of browsing, but the patterns were odd. Plants stripped at irregular heights as if something much larger than deer had been feeding. And the smell, faint but persistent, like meat left too long in summer heat, mixed with something sharper, more chemical. At 200 feet elevation gain, Ben found the first marker. A pile of stones carefully stacked in a cairn pattern with what looked like scratches carved into the top stone. Not graffiti. Too deliberate. Too old. The marks were weathered, decades old at least, maybe longer. They formed patterns that looked almost like writing, angular and harsh. Ben photographed the cairn with his phone. Battery at 73%, still 1 bar of service. He'd studied enough anthropology to know he was looking at something significant, probably Cherokee or pre-Cherokee. But he also knew that official archaeological sites were all mapped and registered. This wasn't on any database he'd ever seen. The trail continued past the cairn, and so did Ben. His GPS had given up entirely now, the screen showing his position as a blinking dot in blank gray space. No terrain, no trails, no features, just void. His phone's GPS app wasn't any better. According to every electronic device he carried, Benjamin Reeves didn't exist in any mappable location. He pulled out his compass, a Silva Ranger, mechanical and reliable. The needle spun lazily, never settling, as if magnetic north had stopped existing. Ben felt the first thread of real unease. Equipment failures happened, sure, but GPS and compass simultaneously? That suggested either massive magnetic anomaly, which would be documented, studied, on every geological survey, or something else. Something his rational mind didn't want to consider. The trail opened into a clearing 2 hours from where he'd started. A natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside, maybe 50 yards across, ringed by massive hemlocks that looked diseased, needles brown and dropping, bark scored with deep vertical gashes. In the center of the clearing stood a structure, not modern, not recent, a framework of poles and stones, forming what Ben's anthropology textbooks would have called a wickiup or shelter. But the design was wrong for Cherokee architecture. This was older, stranger. The poles arranged in patterns that hurt to look at too long, creating angles that didn't quite make geometric sense. And everywhere, carved into trees, scratched into stones, traced in the bare earth, were symbols. The same angular marks from the cairn, repeated and elaborated, covering every surface. Some were faded, centuries old. Others looked fresh, cut recently enough that sap still wept from the wounds. Ben approached slowly, every instinct screaming caution. This was a find, anthropologically significant, probably protected, definitely requiring immediate documentation and investigation by proper authorities. But it was also wrong in ways he couldn't articulate, ways that bypassed his analytical training and spoke directly to older parts of his brain. Hannah Coleman's backpack lay in front of the structure. Ben recognized it from the photos in the incident report. Purple Osprey Aura, still loaded with gear. He photographed it from multiple angles before touching anything, then carefully opened the main compartment. Tent, sleeping bag, camp stove, all unused. Her journal sat on top, a moleskin notebook with water-stained pages. He opened it carefully. The first entries were mundane. Trail conditions, wildlife sightings, thoughts about work and relationships. But the entries grew stranger as they progressed, the handwriting more erratic. July 7th. found reference in Mooney's Myths of the Cherokee to a Wendigo-like entity in Smoky Mountain oral traditions. The Cherokee called it something else, Nun Yunui, the stonecoat, but the descriptions match Algonquian Wendigo accounts. Insatiable hunger, cannibalistic transformation, association with extreme cold despite summer heat. Going to investigate the sites mentioned in 19th century missionary reports. July 8th. Located what I think is the ceremonial site. The symbols match descriptions from Ojibwe pictographs, warning markers. The Smokies had Algonquian-speaking people centuries before the Cherokee, possible cultural transmission. This could be significant. This could be proof of prehistoric trade routes. July 9th. Something is wrong here. The temperature drops around the site 10 to 15 degrees colder than surroundings despite full sun. My compass won't work. GPS is showing impossible readings. Food tastes like ash. So hungry but can't eat. Hearing voices in a language I don't understand but somehow recognize. Should leave. Can't leave. It's calling. The entry ended there. No further pages, just blank paper with what looked like dried bloodstains on the margins. Ben's hands were shaking, not from fear, he still didn't believe in monsters, but from the implications. Hannah had come here looking for folklore evidence and had experienced some kind of psychological break. Maybe environmental factors, carbon monoxide from a natural vent, toxic plants causing hallucinations, something explainable. But that didn't explain her backpack with all her survival gear left behind. Didn't explain the impossibility of the site itself, existing in unmapped space. The temperature dropped as Ben stood there thinking. Dropped dramatically, maybe 20 degrees in seconds. In July, at 4,000 feet elevation in Tennessee. His breath misted in the suddenly frigid air, and that meat rot smell intensified, became overwhelming. From the tree line, someone spoke in a language Ben didn't recognize. The words were guttural, clicking, structured in ways that English wasn't. Algonquian, maybe, Ojibwe or Cree, but Ben had no way to be sure. He turned slowly. A figure stood at the clearing's edge, so thin it looked skeletal, at least 7 feet tall, wearing what might have been clothes once, but were now just tatters of hide and leather hanging from bones. Its skin was gray-white, stretched tight over a frame that looked starved beyond any possibility of life. Its eyes were black, completely black, with no whites at all, and it was smiling. Hannah Coleman? Ben's voice came out steady despite everything. Training kicked in. Assess the situation, maintain calm, look for rational explanations. Maybe someone in costume, maybe a survivalist living rough in the backcountry. The height could be stilts, the appearance could be makeup and prosthetics. The figure tilted its head, the movement too fluid, too boneless. It spoke again, the same harsh language, and this time Ben's hindbrain translated, even though he shouldn't have understood. Hungry. Always hungry. Never full. You're not real, Ben said, and hated how his voice shook. Psychological phenomenon. Shared delusion, environmental factors causing hallucination. The creature laughed. The sound was wrong, wet and crackling, like frozen meat thawing too fast. It took a step forward, and Ben saw that its feet didn't quite touch the ground. That frost formed where it moved, coating leaves and stones with ice despite the July heat. The scholar tries to explain, tries to categorize, tries to make me fit in neat boxes. The voice was in his head now, not spoken aloud, like the others, like the woman, like all who find this place. Where is Hannah Coleman? Professional questions. Focus on the mission. Don't acknowledge the impossibility. Where are the others who disappeared? Here. The creature gestured at the ceremonial structure, and Ben saw for the first time what he'd missed before. The poles weren't wood. They were bones, massive and ancient, arranged in patterns that were definitely intentional, definitely wrong, and scattered around the base, half buried in earth and leaves, gear, backpacks, boots, water bottles. 4 sets, matching the 4 missing hikers, and newer items, Hannah's belongings mixed with older weathered equipment from previous disappearances. They found what they sought: knowledge of old things, understanding of old hungers. Now they understand forever. Ben's rational mind was fracturing, splitting into pieces that couldn't reconcile what he saw with everything he knew about reality. This isn't possible. Wendigo aren't real. They're Algonquian mythology, cultural manifestations of cannibalism taboos, psychological constructs. Names limit, categories confine. The creature moved closer, and the cold intensified. Ben's exposed skin burned with it, flash frostbite setting in. I am hunger. I am winter in summer. I am what happens when flesh consumes flesh, when survival requires violation of law older than your people's presence on this land. The Cherokee warnings. Ben's mind was still trying to process, to understand. The symbols. They marked this place as dangerous, quarantined it. They remembered. They kept the treaties. Did not hunt here, did not camp here, did not disturb what sleeps hungry. The creature's smile widened impossibly. But your people forget. Always forget. Come with your maps and your science and your certainty that old warnings are just superstition. Ben backed toward the trail, his hand fumbling for the radio. Dispatch, I need immediate backup coordinates. Static. The radio was dead, frozen solid despite working moments before. His phone showed 0 bars, battery draining visibly, down to 40%, 30, 20. No calling for help. This place doesn't exist on your maps, remember? How can they find what isn't there? The creature lunged, not walking, lunging, impossibly fast, covering 30 feet in a single movement. Ben dove sideways, his scientific training abandoning him for pure survival instinct. He ran. The trail back was different now, changed. Trees that had been on the left now appeared on the right. The cairn he'd passed was gone, or maybe he'd missed the turn, or maybe, behind him, laughter, wet and crackling and hungry. The temperature plummeted further. Ben's lungs burned with cold, each breath stabbing like knives. His fingers were numb, his face aching. In July, in Tennessee. This wasn't possible, this wasn't real, this was... He burst into another clearing. Different from the first, smaller, but with the same wrong angles, the same bone structure, the same symbols carved everywhere. And standing in the center, Hannah Coleman, or what had been Hannah Coleman. She was thin, skeletal thin, her eyes completely black. Her lips were stained dark with something that might have been blood, or might have been something worse. When she smiled, her teeth looked too sharp, too numerous. Benjamin Reeves. Her voice had that same wet, crackling quality. Biologist, rationalist, man of science. Hannah, you need medical attention. Ben heard himself talking, heard his training trying to reassert control. You've been exposed to something. Toxins, pathogens, something causing hallucinations and behavioral changes. Still explaining. Hannah laughed, and it sounded like the creature's laugh, like they'd learned it from the same source. Still categorizing. Do you know what happens when you violate the most fundamental prohibition? When hunger becomes stronger than humanity? She held up her hands. They were clean, but Ben's mind provided the image anyway. Meat, flesh, the ultimate transgression. I was so hungry. Days up here and my food tasted like ash, like poison. The only thing that smelled good was... No. Ben's voice cracked. You didn't. You couldn't. The first hiker, the man from Knoxville. Hannah's black eyes were empty of remorse, empty of anything human. He'd been dead for days when I found him. An accident, a fall, something mundane. But the hunger was so strong, and what difference did it make? He was already dead, already meat. That's a psychological break. Extreme circumstances. Starvation psychology. One taste. Hannah stepped closer, frost spreading from her footprints. That's all it takes. One violation of the old law. Then the hunger never stops. Then you become what I became, what he became. She gestured behind Ben where the tall creature had emerged from the trees, still smiling. What all of us became. More figures appeared. The 3 other missing hikers, all skeletal, all with those black eyes and sharp smiles, all radiating cold that shouldn't exist. The Cherokee knew, Hannah continued. The Algonquian peoples before them knew. Some places are marked as forbidden not because of superstition, but because of memory. Memory of what happens when people come here hungry, when the Wendigo spirit finds them and offers a solution to starvation. This is mass delusion. Ben was shaking now, from cold and terror and the dissolution of his worldview. Environmental factors causing shared psychosis. Still explaining. Hannah's voice rose, became inhuman. Always explaining. Your science is just another story, Benjamin. Another way to avoid confronting what you know in your bones, what your ancestors knew before they forgot. The tall creature placed a skeletal hand on Ben's shoulder. The touch burned with cold, and Ben felt something shift inside him. Felt hunger, sudden and overwhelming, worse than he'd ever experienced. His stomach cramped, his mouth watered, and every cell in his body screamed for sustenance. Now you understand, the creature's voice echoed in his mind. Now you feel what we feel, the hunger that never ends, that cannot be satisfied by normal food, normal prey. Ben looked at his hands. They seemed thinner than before, the flesh tight against the bones. When had he last eaten? This morning? Yesterday? Time felt strange here, malleable. He'd been in the mountains for hours burning calories, and suddenly the hunger was everything. Hannah smiled. We keep the ritual site. We maintain the warnings. We wait for those who ignore the signs, who come looking for secrets. She gestured at the bone structure, the symbols. The forest provides, always provides. Hikers who don't listen, who don't respect the marked places. I won't. Ben's voice was barely a whisper. I'm not going to. You already are. Hannah pointed at his hands. Ben looked down. His fingernails were longer, darker. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and the cold, the impossible cold, was spreading through his body, replacing warmth, replacing humanity with something older and hungrier. One bite, the creature whispered. That's all it takes. And there are always more hikers, always more who ignore the warnings. Ben ran again. Blind panic now, no thought, just desperate flight. The trees whipped past, the trail twisted and changed, and everywhere he saw symbols, warnings, markers that should have been heeded. He crashed through underbrush, fell down slopes, picked himself up and kept moving. The hunger followed, the cold followed. And in his mind, thoughts that weren't his own. So hungry, always hungry, never full. He burst out of the tree line at sunset, onto the boulevard trail where tourists hiked in sneakers and took selfies. A family was setting up camp 50 yards away, parents and 2 kids laughing about s'mores and ghost stories. Ben collapsed on the trail. His hands were still his hands, normal flesh and normal color. His skin was warm, his breathing ragged but human. He'd made it out. Somehow he'd made it out. The family noticed him. The father jogged over. Hey man, you okay? You look rough. Fine. Ben's voice cracked. Just got turned around. Lost the trail. Want some water? Food? The father offered a granola bar, and the smell. The smell was incredible. Better than anything Ben had ever smelled. His mouth watered, his stomach clenched, and for just a moment he imagined what it would taste like, how good it would feel to satisfy the hunger that suddenly consumed him. Ben scrambled backward, horror washing through him. No thank you, I'm fine. I need to... He keyed his radio, still frozen solid and useless. His phone was dead, completely drained. I need to get to dispatch, Ben managed. Emergency. He stumbled down the trail, away from the family, away from the smell of living flesh that made his mouth water and his mind scream in horror. The hunger followed, constant and terrible, and Ben knew with awful certainty that it would never fully go away. He reached the ranger station 2 hours after full dark. Marie took one look at him and called for medical. "Jesus, Ben, what happened?" "Found Coleman's gear." His voice sounded distant, not quite his own. "Didn't find Coleman. That area," he swallowed hard, "that area needs to be marked closed, permanently. You look hypothermic." Marie wrapped him in emergency blankets. "In July? How is that possible?" "It's not," Ben whispered. "None of it's possible." They airlifted him to UT Medical Center in Knoxville, treated him for exposure, dehydration, possible psychological trauma. The doctors couldn't explain the mild frostbite on his fingers and face. Not in summer, not with the weather they'd been having. Couldn't explain why his core temperature was 5 degrees below normal despite hours of warming. Couldn't explain the hunger. Ben ate constantly for 3 days. Everything tasted wrong. Too bland, too unsatisfying, like his taste buds had recalibrated to something else. Only meat tasted remotely right, and even then it wasn't enough. Never enough. He resigned from the Park Service a week later. Moved to Nashville, tried to lose himself in the city, in crowds and artificial light where Wendigo spirits didn't exist, and hunger was just a sign you needed lunch. But the cold followed him. In summer heat, in his apartment with the heater running, he felt cold. His hands stayed pale, his appetite stayed wrong. And sometimes, late at night, he heard voices speaking in languages he shouldn't understand but did. "Come back. Join us. Maintain the site, keep the warnings." You tasted it. You felt it. The hunger that never ends. You're one of us now. You just don't know it yet. Ben tried to ignore it, tried to rebuild his rational worldview, to explain everything away as trauma response, as psychological break caused by stress and fear. But his compass still wouldn't work around him. Electronics failed in his presence, and the hunger never stopped. 3 months later, a hiker disappeared in the Smokies backcountry. Young woman, experienced, last seen heading into the restricted area between LeConte and Klingman's Dome. The Park Service asked Ben for a statement since he'd been the last ranger to investigate that section before it was marked hazardous. Ben declined to comment, but he knew what had happened to her, knew what was happening even now, as she found the ceremonial site, as she discovered the warnings too late, as the hunger took hold and offered a solution that would doom her forever. He knew because part of him wanted to go back. Part of him wanted to return to that clearing, to join Hannah and the others, to stop fighting the transformation and embrace what he was becoming. The Wendigo spirit had marked him. One touch, one moment of exposure to that ancient hunger, and he'd been changed. Not fully transformed, he'd escaped too quickly for that, but changed enough to never be fully human again. Ben keeps his apartment refrigerator temperature at 30 degrees, wears sweaters in summer, avoids crowds because the smell of living people makes him salivate in ways that terrify him. He researches constantly, looking for some explanation, some cure, some way to reverse what happened. But the old stories are clear. Once the Wendigo spirit touches you, once you feel that hunger, there's no going back. You either transform completely, becoming one of the skeletal guardians who maintain the forbidden places, or you fight it forever, staying human but never warm, never satisfied, never free of the knowledge that you're changing into something that shouldn't exist. The symbols in the Smokies still mark that place. The Cherokee warnings are still valid. The ceremonial site still stands, maintained by those who've transformed, waiting for the next hiker who ignores the signs and seeks what should stay hidden. And Benjamin Reeves, former Park Service biologist, man of science and reason, knows that some folklore is true. That maps sometimes lie. That there are places where ancient things still hunger, still wait, still offer solutions to starvation that cost more than flesh. He knows because he lives with that hunger now, every day, every moment, fighting it, resisting it, knowing that one slip, one moment of weakness, and he'll return to those mountains and join the others who guard the forbidden places. The Wendigo spirit is patient. It's waited centuries. It can wait for Benjamin Reeves to give up fighting, to accept what he's becoming, to embrace the cold hunger that will never, ever end. Some transformations happen instantly. Others take years. Ben can feel his changing slowly, degree by degree, day by day. His rational mind catalogues the progression with clinical detachment, even as the rest of him screams in terror at what he's becoming. The Smokies are still there. The ceremonial site is still waiting. And Hannah Coleman, if that name means anything anymore, is still maintaining the warnings that Ben and others like him ignored. The old stories were true all along. Ben just had to become a monster himself to believe them. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The rain had been falling upward for 3 minutes before Nicole Valdez accepted she wasn't imagining it. She stood on the Hall of Mosses Trail in Olympic National Park's Hoh Rainforest, watching droplets rise from the forest floor like someone had reversed gravity. Just for this 1 square mile of Washington wilderness, the rain ascended in slow motion, defying physics, defying sense. Each drop climbing back toward the canopy of Sitka spruce and western hemlock that towered 300 feet overhead. Nicole blinked hard, rubbed her eyes, checked her phone. 4:47 p.m., October 23, 2018, 17% battery. The screen showed 5 missed calls from her supervisor, but no signal bars. Typical for the rainforest. She looked up again. The rain was still falling upward. "Okay," she said aloud, her voice swallowed by the oppressive moss-draped silence. "Okay, this is some kind of atmospheric phenomenon. Microburst, or temperature inversion, something meteorological that I just don't understand because I'm not a meteorologist. I'm a 24-year-old seasonal ranger who barely passed the training course." Talking to herself. Great sign. 3 months into her first season with the National Park Service, and she was already losing it. Nicole had come to Olympic because she'd needed to prove something. To her parents, to herself, to everyone who'd said she was too soft for field work, too anxious, too prone to overthinking every decision. The Pacific Northwest was supposed to be peaceful. Moss and rain and quiet trails. Not like the stories you heard about Yellowstone bears or Grand Canyon accidents. Just rain. Endless, gentle rain. Except the rain wasn't falling gently anymore. It was falling wrong. She checked her Garmin InReach, the satellite communicator that was supposed to work anywhere. The screen was black, unresponsive. She pressed the SOS button. Nothing. Pressed it again, held it down. Dead. She'd charged it fully this morning, but somehow the battery had drained completely in 6 hours. Nicole pulled out the printed map from her jacket, old school, waterproof, the kind veteran rangers insisted on carrying. She was looking for Megan Price, a solo hiker reported missing 2 days ago. Last known position, somewhere along the Hoh River Trail system, possibly the connecting routes to the coastal wilderness. Megan Price. 32, experienced backpacker from Seattle, had done this trail system dozens of times. Her car had been found at the visitor center, her gear meticulously organized in the trunk. But Megan herself, gone. No trace on the trails, no camping permits filed, no emergency beacon activation. Just gone like she'd stepped into the rainforest and ceased to exist. Nicole had volunteered for the search because everyone else was busy with a storm damage assessment on the coast. Because she wanted to prove she could handle field work alone. Because she was tired of being the rookie who needed supervision. Now watching rain fall upward while her equipment failed and the forest pressed in around her with its suffocating green silence, Nicole wondered if maybe everyone had been right about her. She forced her feet to move. The trail continued west, deeper into the Hoh's interior, where the forest grew so thick that daylight barely penetrated even at noon. The moss hung from branches like curtains, like hair, transforming familiar trees into shapes that looked almost human in her peripheral vision. 20 minutes later, Nicole found the first shrine. It wasn't on any map. A small structure built between 2 massive nurse logs, constructed from what looked like driftwood and decorated with objects that made Nicole's stomach clench. Origami cranes, dozens of them, their paper yellowed and fragile. Photographs in plastic sleeves, faces weathered by moisture but still visible. Asian faces, families, children, and in the center, a white kimono hanging from a branch, pristine and impossibly dry despite the rainforest's perpetual dampness. Nicole photographed it with her phone, the flash too bright in the gloom. The camera app showed the timestamp, 4:47 p.m., the same time it had been 20 minutes ago when she checked. She looked at the phone again. Still 4:47 p.m. The seconds weren't moving. "No," Nicole whispered. No. Battery's dying, that's all. Clock's frozen because..." The kimono moved, not wind. There was no wind in the deep rainforest, just stillness broken only by the constant whisper of rain. But the white fabric swayed, rotated slowly, as if someone invisible was examining it, considering wearing it. Nicole backed away, her hand fumbling for the radio on her belt. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Valdez, I'm at..." She checked the GPS. The screen showed static, gray pixels forming patterns that looked almost like text in a language she didn't recognize. "I'm requesting backup. I found something unusual on the Ho River Trail." The radio emitted a sound like screaming. High-pitched, agonized, definitely human, but wrong in ways that made Nicole's hindbrain scream danger. Then it cut to silence, the display dark. All her electronics were dead now. Phone, GPS, radio, even her backup flashlight. Everything with a battery had simply stopped working. Nicole pulled out her compass, simple, mechanical, reliable. The needle spun wildly, never settling, pointing everywhere and nowhere. In the growing darkness, something pale moved between the trees. Nicole's training said, "Stay calm, assess the situation, don't panic." But Nicole's instincts, the ones that had kept humans alive for millennia before technology and training, said run. She ran. The trail twisted through the moss-covered forest, roots reaching up to catch her boots, branches clawing at her Park Service jacket. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Not the crunch of hiking boots on soil, but something softer, more deliberate. The whisper of bare feet on wet ground. Nicole risked a glance back. The pale shape was closer now, moving between the trees with a gliding motion that suggested feet not quite touching earth. Long black hair hung forward, obscuring the face. White clothing, the kimono from the shrine, she realized with sick certainty, trailed behind like grave wrappings. She faced forward and ran harder. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed protest, but fear gave her speed she didn't know she possessed. The trail opened into a wider section, and Nicole saw the shrine. The same shrine with the origami cranes and photographs and white kimono hanging between the nurse logs. Impossible. She'd been running in a straight line following the trail markers. She couldn't have circled back, but there it was, identical to the last detail. Except now, someone stood beside it. Megan Price. Nicole recognized her from the missing person photos. Shoulder-length blonde hair, athletic build, the North Face jacket from the description. She stood perfectly still, facing the shrine, her back to Nicole. "Megan?" Nicole's voice cracked. "Megan Price? I'm with the Park Service. We've been looking for you." Megan didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the voice. She stood with unnatural stillness, not even breathing, not even swaying. Nicole approached slowly, hand outstretched. "Megan, are you hurt? Can you hear me?" She touched Megan's shoulder. The woman turned. The face was wrong. Megan Price's features, yes, but slack and empty, eyes unfocused and staring at nothing. Her skin was gray pale, her lips blue tinged. She looked like she'd been dead for days, but she was standing, moving. Her mouth opened, and Nicole heard her own voice come out. "I'm requesting backup. I found something unusual on the Ho River Trail." The exact words Nicole had spoken into the radio. The exact inflection, the exact tremor of fear. Megan's mouth kept moving, but now it was the radio screaming. that awful, agonized sound coming from her throat. Nicole stumbled backward, tripped over a root, landed hard in the moss. Megan, or what wore Megan's shape, took a step forward, then another, movements jerky and wrong like a puppet learning to walk. The pale figure emerged from the trees behind Megan. Closer now, and Nicole could see details she wished she couldn't. The white kimono was a burial garment stained with earth and water. The long black hair hung wet and tangled, obscuring a face that was there and not there, features shifting, never quite coming into focus. But the hands were clear, pale and delicate and reaching. Nicole scrambled to her feet and ran again. This time she left the trail entirely, crashing through underbrush, not caring about protocol or preservation or anything except getting away from those hands, that face, that impossible wrongness. She burst into a clearing and stopped short. Bodies hung from the trees, dozens of them, suspended by their hair, swaying gently though there was still no wind. They wore the gray-green uniforms of Park Service Rangers, all women, all with Nicole's face, all in various states of decay. Nicole screamed. Actually screamed, the sound ripping from her throat without thought or control. She spun to run and found herself face to face with the pale figure. This close she could see through the curtain of black hair. The face beneath was young, maybe 20, delicate features twisted with rage so intense it transcended expression and became something existential. The eyes, when they focused, when they resolved into something visible, were full of hate that felt centuries old. The figure's mouth opened and words came out in Japanese, the sounds harsh and guttural. Onryo fukushu, eien ni. Nicole didn't speak Japanese, but somehow she understood. Vengeful spirit, revenge, forever. The pale hands reached for Nicole's face, and where they touched, ice spread across her skin despite the rainforest's perpetual dampness. The cold was absolute, invasive, reaching past flesh into bone, into something deeper, into memory. Images flooded Nicole's mind. Not hers, but felt with the intimacy of lived experience. A camp. Not in the forest, but near the coast. Tar paper barracks and barbed wire fences. Families crowded together, stripped of homes and businesses and rights. The year was 1942, World War II, Japanese internment. A young woman, the pale figure Nicole realized when she'd been alive, standing before guards, protesting, demanding, refusing to be silent about the injustice, the theft, the imprisonment of American citizens because of their ancestry. They'd called her dangerous, a troublemaker. They'd separated her from her family. And then, darkness, water, cold, the Olympic coast, notorious for its rip currents and cold water that killed in minutes. An accident, an unfortunate drowning. One less voice raised in protest. But she hadn't drowned quietly, hadn't died accepting the injustice. She died in rage and hate and a determination that this would not stand, that she would make them remember, make them pay, make them understand what they'd done. She died and had not stopped being angry. The visions released Nicole, and she fell to her knees in the moss, gasping. The hanged bodies were gone. The clearing was just a clearing, empty except for Nicole and the Uri. Because that's what it was, she understood now. A spirit of vengeance, bound to this place by fury and injustice, manifesting that rage through endless repetition of its death. "I'm sorry," Nicole whispered. "I'm sorry for what happened to you. It was wrong, it was evil, but I wasn't." The Uri tilted its head, hair parting slightly to reveal one eye. When it spoke again, Nicole heard English and Japanese simultaneously, languages overlapping. "You wear the uniform, you serve the system. You are them." "No, I'm a ranger, I'm trying to help people, They said they helped too. Said the camps were for our protection. Said it was necessary. Said we should be grateful." The Uri's voice rose, became multiple voices, dozens of women speaking in unison. Said our deaths were accidents. Said we brought it on ourselves. Said, all lies. I know. Nicole was crying now. tears mixing with the rain that had started falling normally again. Or maybe had never stopped falling upward. Maybe that had been another manifestation of wrongness. I know it was lies. I know what was done to you was unconscionable. But Megan Price, where is she? Did you? She came seeking spirits. The Uri gestured, and Nicole saw Megan, the real Megan, not the puppet, sitting against a tree 30 feet away. She looked unharmed but blank, staring at nothing, awareness gone from her eyes. She wanted to document hauntings for her social media, wanted to make content from suffering, wanted to turn tragedy into entertainment. Nicole crawled toward Megan, felt for a pulse. Steady, strong, but the woman didn't react to touch or voice. What did you do to her? Showed her. The Uri moved closer, and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Showed her what it feels like, to drown in cold water while people watch and do nothing, to die unjustly and have it called accident, to scream and not be heard, over and over, forever. Please. Nicole looked up at the spirit. Let her go. She didn't know. She was thoughtless, not malicious. Please. Like they didn't know? The Uri's face solidified for just a moment. Young, beautiful, destroyed by rage. Like the guards who pushed me into the water didn't know what would happen? Like the government that built the camps didn't know they were wrong? They did know, Nicole said quietly. They knew exactly what they were doing. And it was evil. And nothing I can say will ever make it right. But trapping Megan here, showing her horror on endless repeat, that doesn't balance the scales. That just creates more suffering. Good. The Uri smiled, and it was the most terrible thing Nicole had ever seen. Let there be more suffering. Let everyone who comes to this forest feel a fraction of what I felt. Let the punishment continue until they remember, until they understand, until they... The spirit stopped, looked past Nicole at something in the trees. An old woman stood at the clearing's edge. She wore modern clothing, jeans, a rain jacket, but carried herself with the bearing of someone much older than her apparent 70-some years. Her face was weathered, kind, and infinitely sad. She spoke in Japanese, her voice gentle but firm. The Uri recoiled, hair whipping around its face, the white kimono billowing though there was still no wind. The old woman continued speaking, stepping forward, hands raised in supplication, not threat. Nicole didn't understand the words, but she felt their weight. Apology, acknowledgement, witness. The Uri screamed, not the radio scream, but something raw and human and heartbroken. The sound contained decades of rage and grief and injustice too large for any single voice to hold. And then, silence. The white kimono fell empty to the moss. The presence that had filled the clearing with cold and rage simply stopped existing, released or banished, or maybe just finally heard. The old woman sighed deeply, picked up the kimono with reverent care. She looked at Nicole. You should take your friend and leave this place. The Onryo is released, but the wrongness remains. This forest remembers. Who are you? Nicole managed to ask. Granddaughter of the woman who died here. The old woman folded the kimono carefully. I come every year to honor her, to speak the prayers that release her. But her anger is strong. Each year it takes longer. Each year I wonder if I have the words anymore. I'm sorry, Nicole said again, inadequate but necessary. For what happened, for all of it. We all carry the weight of history. The woman touched Nicole's shoulder gently. The question is, what we do with it. Go now. Your friend needs medical attention. Nicole gathered Megan into her arms. The woman was breathing but unresponsive, shock maybe, or something beyond psychology's ability to diagnose, and began the long carry back toward the trailhead. Her electronics were still dead. Her compass still spun uselessly. But somehow the trail was clear, marked by small stones that Nicole didn't remember seeing before, guiding her through the darkening forest. It took 4 hours to reach the visitor center. Megan remained catatonic the entire way, her eyes open but seeing nothing. EMTs took her immediately, loading her into an ambulance with worried glances and rapid-fire questions Nicole couldn't answer. She was sitting under a tree, Nicole said, knowing it wasn't enough. Unresponsive when I found her. No visible injuries. I don't know what happened. The lie felt necessary. What could she say that wouldn't sound insane? That a vengeful spirit had trapped Megan in an endless loop of dying. That the forest held memories of internment and injustice that manifested as impossible weather and temporal distortions. No one would believe her. Nicole barely believed it herself. Megan Price recovered, physically. Neurologically, the doctors found nothing wrong. But she never spoke again. Never responded to stimuli, never showed recognition of family or friends. She was transferred to a long-term care facility in Seattle, where she remained staring at nothing, trapped in whatever the URI had shown her. Nicole requested transfer 3 days later. Olympic superintendent was understanding. A traumatic experience, a missing hiker found in disturbing condition. Perfectly reasonable to need a change of scene. She was reassigned to Shenandoah National Park in Virginia, far from the Pacific Northwest, far from rain and moss and forests that remembered atrocities. But Nicole never forgot. Couldn't forget, even when she wanted to. On October 23rd every year, the anniversary of that day in the Ho, Nicole's electronics fail. Phone, computer, GPS, anything with a battery. They all drain completely, no matter how recently charged. The effect lasts 24 hours exactly, and sometimes in the corner of her vision, Nicole sees a pale figure in white. Never direct, never when she looks straight on, but there in her peripheral awareness. Watching, reminding, making sure Nicole remembers what happened, remembers the history that people want to forget. Nicole left the Park Service eventually, became a teacher instead, focusing on history that textbooks glossed over or omitted entirely. Japanese internment, of course, but also every other injustice, every other atrocity committed and then buried under euphemisms and comfortable lies. She tells her students about Executive Order 9266, about the 120,000 people imprisoned without trial, without due process, because fear and racism were more politically convenient than justice. About the young woman who protested and was silenced, whose rage was so great it couldn't be contained even by death. She doesn't tell them about the Uri, about rain falling upward and time stopping and forests that remember. But she makes them understand that history has weight, that the past isn't past, that actions have consequences that ripple forward through decades and generations. And every October 23rd, when her electronics fail and she sees that pale figure in white watching from the shadows, Nicole whispers the words she learned that day. I remember. I witness. I'm sorry. It's not enough. It will never be enough to balance what was done. But it's what she has. Memory and acknowledgement and the determination that this particular injustice will not be forgotten, will not be dismissed, will not be buried under comfortable silence. The Ure appears less frequently now. Maybe because Nicole teaches the history. Maybe because someone finally heard the story and bore witness and said clearly, this was wrong, and we remember. Or maybe because the old woman still goes to the Ho rainforest every year, still speaks her prayers, still tries to release her grandmother's rage and grant her peace at last. Nicole hopes so. Hopes that someday the Ure will be fully released, that the forest will stop remembering, that the weight of injustice will finally be light enough to lift. But she also knows that some wounds are too deep to heal completely, that some rage is justified, righteous, necessary, that forgetting is its own form of injustice. So she teaches, she remembers, she witnesses. And when the pale figure appears in her peripheral vision, Nicole doesn't run anymore. She nods, acknowledges the presence, speaks the apology and the memory. Because that's what the living owe the dead, not forgetting, not moving on too quickly, not declaring history closed and finished and no longer relevant. The Uri taught her that. The forest taught her that. Megan Price, trapped forever in whatever horror the spirit showed her, taught her that. Some stories don't have happy endings. Some hauntings are earned, justified, necessary reminders of evils that people want to forget. Nicole Valdez learned that in the Hoh rainforest in October 2018, when she was 24 years old and new to the Park Service, and unprepared for the weight of history that still haunted the moss-draped trees. She carries that knowledge still, carries it in every lecture, every lesson, every October 23rd when her electronics fail, and she sees white fabric moving in the corner of her vision. The Uri watches. Nicole teaches. Megan stares at nothing in her care facility room. And the rain in the Hoh rainforest still falls upward sometimes, when the conditions are right, when the anger is strong, when someone needs to be reminded that injustice has consequences that transcend death and time and comfortable distance. The forest remembers. And now, because of that day, so does Nicole Valdez. Forever. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Lisa Hoffman's satellite phone crackled with Quinn Blackwood's voice at 11:47 a.m. Temperature already hitting 118 degrees in the Death Valley shade that didn't exist. Lisa, something's wrong with my hands. They're moving, but I'm not. Static swallowed the words, then returned with Quinn speaking Japanese, fluid and native, despite Quinn being from Montana and barely knowing Spanish. The voice continued, layered now. Two people speaking through one throat. Quinn's panicked English underneath and something older, colder. Speaking words Lisa's translation app would later identify as, I have waited 70 years. I am owed. I am taking. Then screaming. Then the line went dead, leaving Lisa staring at coordinates that placed Quinn 12 miles into the Panamint Range backcountry, where summer temperatures could kill in 4 hours, and the nearest backup was 3 days away. Lisa's fingers went to her pocket. Automatic motion touching the photograph she carried everywhere. Emma, age 8, gap-toothed smile. Jack, age 5, holding his stuffed dinosaur. Both staying with their father in Boise this week while Lisa worked her rotation at Death Valley. Both expecting their nightly call at 8 p.m. sharp. The call Lisa never missed. The promise she'd made when the divorce finalized 6 months ago. Mommy always comes home. The satellite phone coordinates read 36, 1423 degree N, 117,000 Nozo 892 degree W, elevation 2,847 feet in the Panamint Range. Quinn Blackwood had gone out yesterday on routine trail maintenance, was supposed to check in every 4 hours, had missed the 8 p.m. check-in, the midnight, the 4 a.m. Now this. Lisa keyed her Motorola radio, the old XTS model that was more reliable than the newer digital systems in Death Valley's weird electromagnetic environment. Hoffman to Furnace Creek. Emergency transmission received from Blackwood. Coordinates placing them in Panamint backcountry. Possible heat injury, behavioral changes. I'm initiating emergency response. Request immediate backup. The response came through clear. Ranger dispatch sounding tired. Copy, Hoffman. Nearest unit is Edwards at Scotty's Castle. Minimum 6 hours out. Air support unavailable until tomorrow. Heat thermals too dangerous for helicopter. Advise assess situation and hold position until backup arrives. 6 hours. From 118 degree heat climbing to predicted 122 by 2 p.m. Quinn could be dead in 6 hours. Hell, Lisa could be dead in 6 hours if she made bad decisions. But the voice on the satellite phone, the Japanese, the layered speech, Quinn's hands moving without Quinn's control. Lisa made the decision that would define everything that followed. Hoffman responding solo. Advise backup proceed to coordinates when available. I'm taking standard emergency kit, 4 liters water, GPS, satellite phone, beginning approach now. Lisa, protocol says wait for... She switched off the radio. Protocol said a lot of things. Protocol said Rangers worked in pairs in summer Death Valley. Protocol said you didn't go into backcountry alone when it was hot enough to literally cook eggs on rocks, when dehydration could hit in 90 minutes, when exposure could kill before you realized you were dying. But Protocol didn't have 2 kids expecting their mother to call at 8 p.m. Didn't have Quinn Blackwood's voice speaking languages they didn't know while something took control of their body. Lisa loaded her pack with mechanical precision. Muscle memory from 8 years as a ranger, 3 years here in Death Valley. 4 Nalgene bottles full, plus 2-liter Camelback. Water purification tablets. Emergency bivy. First aid trauma kit. Garmin eTrex GPS. The basic model from 2001 that 8 batteries but worked. Headlamp, spare batteries, signal mirror, flares, satellite phone fully charged. Her personal cell phone. Useless here, no towers, but she carried it anyway for the photos. Emma and Jack smiling at Silverwood Theme Park last month. Emma's school play. Jack's first t-ball game. Lisa looked at them for 5 seconds, memorizing details, then put the phone in a waterproof case. "I'm coming home," she whispered to the images. "Promise." The trailhead into the Panamint backcountry started at Wild Rose, elevation 4,100 feet, which meant descending into heat that got worse with every step down. Lisa started hiking at 12:15 p.m., the absolute worst time to be moving in Death Valley, when rangers told tourists to stay in air-conditioned vehicles and even the lizards hid. The landscape around her looked alien, hostile, beautiful, in the way that dangerous things often were. Cracked earth the color of old bone. Mountains striped in layers of sediment and volcanic rock. Sky bleached white by heat and light. No trees. Nothing survived here except creosote bush and the occasional desperate brittle bush clinging to ravines. The silence was absolute except for her boots on stone and her breathing, already labored despite being in excellent shape. Death Valley held the North American heat record. 134 degrees Fahrenheit at Furnace Creek in 1913. The valley floor sat at 282 feet below sea level, a tectonic sink where heat settled and concentrated, where air became thick and hostile. In summer, park rangers worked dawn and dusk shifts, avoided midday entirely, treated the heat like the predator it was. Lisa was walking directly into its jaws. The GPS showed Quinn's coordinates still 12 miles distant, bearing northeast through terrain that required traversing 3 separate canyon systems. Her eTrex showed her position, showed Quinn's last known location, showed nothing about what lay between. The topo maps indicated dry washes, elevation drops, abandoned mining sites from the 1870s borax operations. Also indicated, in small print on the USGS survey, site of former detention facility, 1942-1943, historical interest only. Lisa knew about Manzanar, the Japanese internment camp 60 miles north near Lone Pine. Knew less about the smaller forgotten facilities scattered through the desert, places where Japanese-American citizens had been held in the panic after Pearl Harbor, places that weren't officially camps but served the same purpose. Detention, isolation, erasure. The Panamint facility had operated for 18 months before being deemed unsuitable and closed. Too hot, too remote, too many deaths from heat stroke and untreated illness. The detainees had been moved to Manzanar proper. The buildings had been dismantled. The graves had been left unmarked, lost when a flash flood reshaped the canyon in 1955. Quinn's coordinates placed them within a quarter mile of the facility's historical location. Lisa's water bottle was already 1/3 empty after 45 minutes. Her shirt was soaked through, sweat evaporating so fast it left salt crystals on the fabric. The heat created visual distortions, made distances impossible to judge, turned the landscape into something that shifted and breathed. She paused every 15 minutes to drink, to check her GPS, to verify she hadn't drifted off course. At the 2-hour mark, she found the first sign that Quinn had come this way. A piece of orange flagging tape tied to a brittle bush, standard trail marker. Then another, 50 yards ahead. Quinn's route matched the GPS coordinates, descending into a canyon system that cut through layers of sedimentary rock like a wound in the earth. The canyon walls offered shade but trapped heat, turned the ravine into a convection oven. Lisa's thermometer read 126 degrees. Her breathing had gone shallow, rapid, body trying to cool itself through respiration. The first signs of heat exhaustion, dizziness, nausea, headache building behind her eyes. She found Quinn's pack at the 3-hour mark. It sat at the edge of a dry wash, perfectly positioned, not dropped or discarded but carefully placed. The pack was open, contents arranged in a neat circle around it. Water bottles, full, First aid kit, unopened. Radio, functioning. GPS unit, powered on and tracking. Everything Quinn would need to survive was here, deliberately left behind. In the center of the circle, a photograph. Old, black and white, edges worn. A young Japanese woman, maybe 20 years old, wearing a simple dress, standing in front of barracks that could only be internment camp housing. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes looked directly at the camera with expression that transcended the decades. Rage, bitter and pure and undimmed by time. On the back of the photograph, written in pencil, Kimiko Tanaka, 1942, I will not forgive. Lisa's satellite phone rang. Quinn's number. She answered, throat too dry for speech. Quinn's voice still layered, the Japanese underneath clearer now. She is showing me things, Lisa. Showing me how she died. Thirst, heat. They wouldn't give her water. Punishment for speaking Japanese, for not being American enough. She died in a punishment cell, metal walls, August heat, locked inside for 3 days. They found her when she stopped screaming. Buried her here without ceremony, without marker, without name. She has been waiting. She has been so patient. And now she is done waiting. Quinn, listen to me. You need to fight this. Fight her. I'm coming to get you, but you need to... The voice changed entirely. No English left. Pure Japanese now. Words Lisa didn't understand, but felt in her bones. The tone conveyed meaning. Accusation, judgment, sentence. The phone went dead again. Lisa picked up the photograph, careful with the fragile paper. Kimiko Tanaka's eyes seemed to follow her, seemed to see through her. The rage in that photographed expression was palpable even across 70 years. How long would you stay angry if you died of thirst in a metal box in August heat? If your own country had imprisoned you for your ethnicity, punished you for speaking your native language, let you die alone and afraid, and buried you without acknowledgement? Forever, Lisa thought. You'd stay angry forever. The canyon descended further, walls narrowing, heat intensifying. Lisa found the second marker at the 4-hour point. Not Quinn's flagging tape, but something older. A wooden post weathered to gray, Japanese characters carved into the wood. Her phone's translation function struggled with the kanji, eventually producing, "Here lie the forgotten. Here wait the unavenged." Beyond the post, the canyon opened into a basin maybe 200 feet across. The ground showed geometric patterns, foundation lines from dismantled buildings, barely visible under decades of sediment. In the center of the basin, a metal structure remained. A punishment cell, 8 feet square. Roof collapsed but walls intact, rusted orange-brown and radiating heat like a furnace even in late afternoon. Quinn Blackwood stood beside the cell, facing away, posture wrong. Too still, too straight. Body moving in small ways that didn't match breathing or balance adjustments. Small jerks and twitches like a puppet testing its strings. "Quinn?" Lisa's voice cracked on the name. Quinn turned, and Lisa saw the truth immediately. The eyes were wrong. Not color or shape, but expression. The fundamental personality behind them changed. Quinn's face wore a smile that Quinn's muscles had never formed before. Smile of someone who'd learned facial expressions from observation rather than feeling them. When Quinn spoke, the voice was entirely Japanese, but Lisa understood anyway. Not translation, but direct meaning impressed on her mind. "You came alone. No backup. No weapons. Just you, trying to save your partner. She showed me that in your thoughts. She is inside you too now, reading. You have children, a boy and a girl. You are afraid of leaving them without a mother." Lisa's hand went to her pocket, to the photograph of Emma and Jack. "Get out of Quinn. Whatever you are, whoever you were, this isn't justice, this is just more suffering." The thing wearing Quinn laughed. Sound harsh and wrong. "Justice? You speak of justice? 70 years in metal box, body dried to leather and bone. 70 years watching people walk over my grave, never knowing I am here, never caring. You think this is suffering? This is mercy. I am giving them the gift of understanding. Them? All who forget. All who benefit from forgetting. All who walk on ground soaked with our blood and think it is only dirt. Quinn's body moved forward, steps mechanical, arms hanging at wrong angles. Lisa backed up, hand fumbling for her radio, for the satellite phone, for anything. The heat was crushing, vision tunneling, dehydration making her thoughts slow and thick. Your children, the voice continued, now speaking English through Quinn's mouth. Emma wants to be a veterinarian. Jack is afraid of thunderstorms. You read to them every night before bed. You promised you would always come home, but you came here instead. You chose. And now you will understand choosing, the way I had to choose between speaking my language and having water, the way I chose pride and died for it. Lisa's vision doubled, tripled. The heat or something else. She saw Quinn's body, but also saw through it. Saw something inside. A woman in white, hair long and black, face hidden, form translucent and cold despite the killing heat. Yurei. She'd read about them in cultural anthropology courses, vengeful spirits of Japanese folklore, souls that died with such hatred they couldn't pass on, couldn't rest, could only hunt. I'm sorry, Lisa said, meaning it. I'm sorry for what happened to you. I'm sorry you were imprisoned, punished, killed. I'm sorry you were forgotten. But taking Quinn won't fix it. Killing me won't fix it. It just continues the cycle. The Yurei emerged partially from Quinn's body, visible as a pale shimmer in the superheated air. Then what fixes it? Acknowledgement? Apology? Justice? There is no justice for the dead. There is only the satisfaction of making the living understand, of teaching them fear, of ensuring they never forget again. Lisa's knees buckled. 4 hours in 120+ degree heat, with too little water, with too much fear. She was going into heat stroke, body shutting down, core temperature rising past the point of sustainable life. Her satellite phone showed 5:47 p.m. In 2 hours and 13 minutes, Emma and Jack would expect their call. Please, Lisa whispered, my children. They need their mother. They're 8 and 5 years old. They haven't done anything. They don't deserve. I had children, the Yurei said, voice suddenly quiet, suddenly grief-heavy instead of rage-heavy. 2 daughters, 3 and 5 years old. They were at Manzanar when I died here. I never saw them again. They grew up thinking I abandoned them, thinking I didn't love them enough to come back. They died, one in childbirth, one in Korea, never knowing I had wanted desperately to return, that I had died trying to be strong enough to see them again. The rage hadn't been all of it, Lisa realized. Beneath the anger was grief so profound it had lasted 7 decades. Grief of a mother separated from children. Grief that had curdled into vengeance because vengeance was easier to carry than sorrow. Then you understand, Lisa said. You understand what you'd be doing to Emma and Jack. Making them lose their mother. Making them grow up wondering why she didn't come home. The Yurei was fully visible now. Woman in white kimono, hair covering face, hands pale and long-fingered. The temperature around her was wrong. Cold air in the heat, frost forming on the metal punishment cell despite the ambient temperature. Quinn's body stood beside her, alive but vacant, consciousness suppressed while the spirit used their form. I understand, the Yurei, Kimiko Tanaka, agreed. That is why you will carry my message, why you will tell my story, why you will make certain I am not forgotten again. Yes, Lisa said immediately. Yes, I promise. I'll tell everyone. I'll make sure Kimiko Tanaka is remembered. I'll make sure what happened here is documented. I'll not just documented, felt, understood. You will carry me with you. Part of me. Always. So you never forget how it feels to be trapped, to be punished for who you are, to die alone and afraid. Lisa felt it then, cold fingers touching her mind, pressing inside. Not full possession like Quinn, but presence, awareness, shared consciousness. She gasped, tried to resist, but the Yurei was already there, settling into the spaces between thoughts, becoming part of Lisa's internal landscape. And with the presence came memories. Not her own, not entirely, but shared. Memories of metal walls heated to the point they burned skin on contact. Of thirst so extreme her tongue had cracked and bled. of calling for her daughters in the darkness. Voice failing, hope dying degree by degree as the heat killed her slowly, of final moments spent not in rage but in sorrow, thinking only that she would never see her babies again. Lisa screamed, the sound torn from her throat, grief and horror and empathy mixing into something that transcended language. When she came back to herself, Quinn was crumpled on the ground, breathing but unconscious, the possession released. The Uri was gone, not vanished, but integrated, presence now living inside Lisa's awareness. She could feel it there, could feel Kimiko's rage, grief, sorrow as a constant ache beneath her own thoughts. Lisa's watch showed 6:23 p.m. She had an hour and 37 minutes to get Quinn stable, to get them both mobile, to get back to Ranger Station before the nightly call to Emma and Jack. She worked on autopilot, Ranger training overriding everything else. Check vitals. Quinn's pulse was thready, skin dangerously hot, eyes dilated and unresponsive. Severe heat stroke, possibly brain damage from extended hyperthermia. Lisa positioned Quinn in recovery position, used precious water to cool their neck and wrists, activated the emergency beacon on her satellite phone. The heat was dropping now as sun descended toward the western peaks. But they were still trapped 12 miles from the nearest road with Quinn unable to walk and Lisa barely able to stand. She pulled out the emergency bivy, set up minimal shade, rationed remaining water between them. Her satellite phone rang. Dispatch. Hoffman, we got your beacon. Air support launching at first light, approximately 05:30 hours. Can you maintain position overnight? Affirmative, Blackwood is critical but stable. Lisa paused, feeling the Uri's presence pulse inside her mind. I'm managing. Copy. We're sending ground team as well, but they won't reach you until mid-morning. Stay hydrated, stay alert, you did good, Lisa. Had she? She'd lost hours to the possession, had bargained with a vengeful spirit, had allowed something to take residence in her mind. But Quinn was alive. And Lisa was alive. And in 93 minutes, she would call her children. Night fell fast in Death Valley, temperature plummeting from 122 to 85 in 2 hours. Lisa sat beside Quinn, monitoring breathing, administering water when consciousness flickered. The stars came out brilliant and cold, the Milky Way visible as a river of light across the sky. And inside Lisa's mind, Kimiko Tanaka watched through her eyes, experiencing starlight for the first time in 70 years, tasting water for the first time since dying of thirst, feeling the cool evening air on skin that had been dead and forgotten. Thank you, the Ure whispered inside Lisa's thoughts. Not rage anymore. Something softer. Thank you for remembering me. At 8:01 p.m. precisely, Lisa called her children. Emma answered on the second ring, Jack shouting, "Mommy," in the background. Lisa talked to them for 30 minutes, asking about their day, hearing about Emma's math test and Jack's new friend at daycare, telling them she loved them, promising she'd be home in 3 days for her rotation break. She didn't tell them about Quinn, didn't tell them about the Uri, didn't tell them that something old and angry and grieving now lived inside her awareness, would live there forever. A constant reminder of injustice and memory, and the price of forgetting. When the call ended, Lisa sat in the darkness, listening to Quinn's breathing, feeling Kimiko's presence settle deeper into her mind. The Ure shared impressions now, not memories, but sensations. Gratitude, sorrow, a fading of the rage that had sustained her for 7 decades. I need something from you, Lisa said aloud, voice small in the vast desert night. I'll carry your story. I'll make sure people know what happened here. But I need you to not interfere with my children. Don't show them memories. Don't speak through me when I'm with them. They're innocent. They deserve to be protected from this. Silence inside her mind, then agreement. Not words, but feeling. Understanding reached between one mother and another, across the boundary of death. The helicopter arrived at dawn, landing as close to the canyon as terrain allowed. Paramedics stabilized Quinn, started IVs, prepared for transport. Lisa gave her report mechanically, left out the possession, said she'd found Quinn severely dehydrated and disoriented. The incident would be recorded as heat stroke with associated behavioral changes. Nobody would question it. Heat did strange things to people in Death Valley. They airlifted Quinn to the hospital in Las Vegas. Prognosis uncertain but improving. Lisa rode in the helicopter, watched the desert scroll beneath her, felt Kimiko watching through her eyes, seeing the landscape from above for the first time. The Uri had spent 70 years trapped in a 200-foot radius, bound to the location of her death, unable to leave, unable to rest. Now carried inside Lisa's consciousness, she was finally free to see beyond the canyon walls, to experience the world she'd been denied. It wasn't the justice Kimiko had wanted, but it was something. Acknowledgement. Remembrance. A promise that her story would be told. Lisa requested 3 days emergency leave, flew back to Boise, held Emma and Jack so tight they complained. She didn't explain why she was crying or why she couldn't stop touching their faces, checking that they were real and present and alive. That night, Emma asked about the sadness in Lisa's eyes. Lisa considered lying, considered protecting her daughter from difficult truths. But Kimiko's presence pulsed inside her mind, reminder of what happened when truths were buried and forgotten. So Lisa told her. Not everything. Emma was 8, didn't need the full horror. But the important parts. About Kimiko Tanaka, who'd been imprisoned for being Japanese during World War II, who'd been punished for speaking her native language, who'd died alone in the desert heat thinking of her daughters. About remembering people who'd been forgotten. About honoring stories that had been erased. Emma listened with serious eyes, asked questions, wanted to know if Kimiko's daughters had lived. Lisa answered honestly. They had, but never knowing their mother had wanted to return to them, never knowing she'd loved them enough to die trying to be strong. That's sad, Emma said, small voice. Yes, Lisa agreed. It is. That's why we have to remember. So sadness doesn't happen again. Lisa returned to Death Valley 2 weeks later, after Quinn had recovered enough to give their own statement. Quinn didn't remember the possession, remembered only going to check trail conditions and waking up in the hospital. They'd been diagnosed with severe heat stroke causing temporary psychosis and memory loss. The official report noted behavioral changes consistent with hyperthermia-induced delirium. But when Lisa visited Quinn before heading back to the park, Quinn looked at her with recognition that went deeper than surface. You feel different, Quinn said quietly, like you're carrying something heavy. I am, Lisa admitted, but it's a weight I agreed to carry. She filed paperwork for historical recognition of the Panamint Detention Facility, requested archaeological survey of the site, pushed for memorial markers. Met resistance, old bureaucracy, uncomfortable history, preference for forgetting over remembering. But Lisa pushed harder, using every resource, every contact, every regulation she could find. Kimiko's presence inside her mind provided motivation. The Uri was quiet now. Rage burned down to ember, but the determination remained. To be known, to be acknowledged, to make certain the suffering meant something. 6 months later, the National Park Service approved a historical marker for the site. Bronze plaque, modest but permanent, naming Kimiko Tanaka among others who died there. Lisa attended the dedication ceremony, brought Emma and Jack, stood in the desert heat and read the inscription aloud. As she spoke Kimiko's name in the canyon where she'd died, Lisa felt the Uri's presence shift inside her mind. Not leaving. That would never happen. The possession was permanent. But changing. The grief rage transforming into something gentler. Peace, almost. Or as close to peace as someone who died that way could achieve. That night, camping with her kids at the Furnace Creek campground, Lisa felt Kimiko watching through her eyes as Emma and Jack played in the late evening coolness, their laughter carrying across the desert. The Uri's presence pulsed with feeling that needed no words. Gratitude for being remembered, sorrow for children she'd never see again, but joy, tentative, fragile, at experiencing parenthood vicariously through Lisa's connection with her own children. They're beautiful, Kimiko whispered inside Lisa's mind. First words spoken in months. Thank you for letting me see them. Lisa didn't respond aloud, but thought clearly. You're welcome. Thank you for trusting me with your story. The possession would be permanent. Lisa would carry Kimiko Tanaka's presence for the rest of her life, would feel the Yurei's emotions layered beneath her own, would sometimes speak with words that weren't entirely hers. It was a price, a bargain made in desperation and maintained through choice. But it meant Kimiko wasn't forgotten anymore. Meant her suffering had been acknowledged, her story told, her humanity recognized across 7 decades of erasure. And it meant Lisa would never forget what she'd learned in the Death Valley heat. That history wasn't abstract, that injustice had names and faces and stories, that remembering could be painful, but forgetting was worse. She looked at her children, playing in the cooling desert evening, and felt Kimiko's presence settle deeper into harmony with her own consciousness. 2 mothers, 2 sets of memories, one shared commitment to protecting the next generation from the mistakes of the past. The desert stretched around them, vast and beautiful and deadly, holding secrets in its depths. But at least one secret had been brought to light. At least one story had been told, and somewhere in the space between life and death, rage and peace, justice and mercy, Kimiko Tanaka finally rested. Not forgiven. What had been done to her could never be truly forgiven, but remembered, acknowledged, honored, and in the end, for a Yurei, for a mother who died thinking of her children, for a woman who'd been erased from history and memory, being remembered was enough. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. David Ramirez had written 4 blog posts debunking Appalachian superstitions when Derek Sullivan disappeared on the summer solstice. By the time he found the altar in the woods, candles still burning, blood still wet, he understood that some beliefs weren't metaphorical. The blog was called Rational Ranger and had maybe 200 regular readers, most of them fellow Park Service employees who appreciated David's sardonic takedowns of tourist paranoia. His most popular post, Why Your Grandmother's Folk Magic is Just Confirmation Bias, had gotten shared on Reddit and earned him both praise and death threats from people who took Appalachian traditions seriously. David had laughed off the threats. He had a master's degree in forestry from NC State, 8 years as a ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and a deep conviction that the universe operated according to discoverable natural laws. Ghosts, curses, and mountain magic were cognitive failures, not supernatural realities. Then Derek Sullivan vanished during the Solstice Folklore Festival in Cades Cove, and David's certainty began to crack. Derek was a folklore researcher from UNC Chapel Hill, 34 years old, studying the persistence of pre-Christian religious practices in isolated Appalachian communities. His research proposal had crossed David's desk 3 months earlier when he'd applied for a backcountry research permit. David had approved it with a note of skepticism, another academic romanticizing rural superstition, treating poverty and isolation as mystical authenticity rather than as social problems requiring solutions. They'd argued about it over beers at the Sugarlands Visitor Center. Derek had insisted that dismissing folk beliefs as mere superstition was itself a form of colonialism, an urban intellectualism that refused to engage with alternative epistemologies. David had countered that calling delusion alternative epistemology was intellectual cowardice, a refusal to apply critical thinking to claims that didn't deserve respect just because they were traditional. You think you're enlightened? Derek had said, already 3 beers in. But you're just scared. Scared that maybe, people who've lived in these mountains for 300 years might know something you don't. David had laughed. Show me evidence that's replicable and falsifiable, and I'll believe anything. Until then, it's just stories people tell to cope with a random universe. Derek had shaken his head. Some stories are true, David, and some truths don't care whether you believe in them or not. That conversation had been on June 18th. Derek Sullivan was reported missing on June 21st, the summer solstice. when he failed to return from a permitted overnight research trip to Cades Cove. His tent was found at his designated campsite, research notes organized inside waterproof bags, his iPhone showing 47% battery but no signal. No signs of struggle. No signs of anything except an abrupt absence, as if he'd simply walked into the forest and ceased to exist. David had volunteered to lead the search and rescue operation, partly from professional duty and partly from guilt. Their last conversation had been an argument, and now Derek was gone, and David couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was teaching him a lesson in humility through the worst possible method. The search grid covered 40 square miles of forest, dense stands of hemlock and poplar, rhododendron thickets so thick you had to crawl through them, terrain that could hide bodies for decades. David's team found nothing the first day, nothing the second day. On the third day, David was checking a sector near Spence Field when his Garmin GPS started glitching. The coordinates jumped erratically, showing him a mile north, then a mile south, then placing him in the middle of the Fontana Lake, despite being nowhere near water. David checked the satellite signal. Full strength. He rebooted the device. The coordinates stabilized, showing his actual position, but the track log revealed something impossible. According to the GPS, he'd walked in a perfect circle for the last 20 minutes despite moving in a straight line. David marked the location and continued searching. 50 yards farther, he found the first symbol. It was carved into a massive oak tree, the cuts fresh and deep, revealing pale wood beneath the bark. A triskelion. 3 spirals radiating from a central point, an ancient Celtic symbol. David recognized it from Derek's research notes, which he'd reviewed during the investigation. Pre-Christian iconography, associated with druids and pagan worship, the kind of thing tourists love to photograph and academics wrote papers about. Except this wasn't historical. The sap was still oozing from the cuts. This had been carved within the last few days. David photographed it with his iPhone and continued forward. More symbols appeared, carved into trees painted on rocks with what looked like rust-colored pigment that David very much hoped wasn't blood. Spirals, concentric circles, antlers rendered in crude but recognizable detail. The symbols formed a path, deliberate and clear, leading deeper into the forest away from any maintained trail. His rational mind told him this was probably teenagers playing at witchcraft, or maybe part of Derek's research, markers he'd left for himself. But David's gut, the part of him he'd learned to trust during 8 years of backcountry rescues, told him something was deeply wrong about this path. The forest was too quiet. No birdsong, no insect sounds. Just the whisper of wind through leaves and the crunch of his boots on the forest floor. He followed the symbols for half a mile. The forest grew darker, the canopy thicker, the undergrowth more tangled. And then he found the clearing. It was roughly circular, maybe 30 feet across, carpeted with moss so thick it felt like walking on foam. In the center stood an altar. Not metaphorical, not symbolic, but an actual stone altar. Waist-high, rectangular, with channels carved into its surface to direct liquid flow. The stone was dark with staining that could have been age, or could have been repeated use for purposes David didn't want to contemplate. Surrounding the altar were 13 stones arranged in a circle, each stone marked with a different symbol. Between the stones, candles burned. Not electric fakery, but real beeswax candles in iron holders, flame steady despite the breeze. At the base of each candle was an offering: flowers, coins, photographs, locks of hair tied with red thread. David approached the altar slowly, his hand moving to the canister of bear spray on his belt. The altar's surface was wet. Fresh blood, bright red, pooling in the carved channels. He bent closer, his forensic training kicking in despite his revulsion. The blood was still liquid, not yet coagulated, minutes old, maybe less. On the altar lay Derek Sullivan's wallet, his UNC ID card on top, placed precisely in the center as if positioned for display. David pulled out his radio. "Base, this is Ramirez. I found evidence related to the Sullivan disappearance. Requesting immediate backup and law enforcement at coordinates 35-5892 north, 83.8794 west. Possible crime scene." The radio crackled with static, then went dead. David checked the battery, Full charge. He tried again. More static, but underneath it something else. A low chanting, rhythmic, many voices speaking in unison. Words he didn't recognize, guttural and old, like Latin but wrong. A sound behind him. David spun, his bear spray raised. A woman stood at the clearing's edge. Elderly, maybe 70, wearing what looked like ceremonial robes made of deerskin, her gray hair crowned with a wreath of oak leaves. She smiled at him, the expression unsettling in its warmth. "David Ramirez," she said, her Appalachian accent thick. "The Rational Ranger. We've been reading your blog." More figures emerged from the forest, circling the clearing. Men and women, ranging in age from teenagers to elderly, all wearing similar robes. David counted 15 before he stopped counting. They moved with eerie synchronization, taking positions between the standing stones. Several held staffs carved with the same symbols he'd seen on the trees. One carried a blade, bronze, shaped like a sickle, its edge catching the candlelight. David's hand tightened on the bear spray. "Where's Derek Sullivan?" The elderly woman stepped into the clearing, moving toward the altar with proprietary confidence. "Dr. Sullivan is fulfilling his purpose. He came here seeking truth about old ways. We've given him deeper truth than his academic mind could process. You need to step back," David said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "I'm a federal law enforcement officer. This is a crime scene. Whatever you've done..." "Crime?" The woman laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the clearing. "Boy, we've been practicing these rites since before your government existed. Since before the white churches came and called us devil worshippers. Since before the Cherokee were driven out, and we inherited their sacred places. This is our church, and tonight is our holiest night." One of the younger members spoke, a man maybe 25 with the build of someone who worked outdoors. "Summer solstice, longest day, when the veil is thinnest and Cernunnos walks the green world." Cernunnos. David had read about it in Derek's notes. Celtic horned god, lord of the forest, associated with fertility, life, death, and the wild hunt. Ancient worship that had supposedly died out centuries ago, replaced by Christianity, supposedly. "This is insane," David said. "You're talking about a mythology that..." "You don't believe," the old woman interrupted. "We know. You've made your disbelief very public. That's why you're perfect." "Perfect for what?" David didn't ask. He backed toward the clearing's edge, calculating his options. 15 cultists, unknown weapons beyond the sickle, dense forest offering both cover and concealment. His bear spray would stop maybe 3 of them before the others overwhelmed him. His radio was dead. His GPS had malfunctioned. He was alone and outmatched. "The skeptic and the believer," the woman continued, moving around the altar in a slow circle. "2 offerings for the solstice. Dr. Sullivan believed too much, you see. Sought the old ways with academic fascination, but no true faith. You believe too little, mock what you don't understand. Both are insults to the god. Both must be corrected." The cultists began to chant, the same words he'd heard on the radio. The candles flared brighter, flames stretching upward impossibly high. And David felt it, a pressure in the air, a weight that had nothing to do with humidity or atmospheric conditions. The rational part of his mind insisted this was mass hysteria, that he was being affected by psychological manipulation and fear. But the part of him that had lived in these mountains for 8 years, that had learned to read weather and animal behavior, and the 1,000 subtle signs the forest gave, knew something was happening that his education hadn't prepared him for. David ran. He crashed through the rhododendron thickets, branches tearing at his face and uniform. Behind him, the cultists didn't pursue, didn't need to. The forest itself seemed to shift around him, trails appearing where none should exist, familiar landmarks absent or wrong. His ranger training told him to follow drainage downhill, find water, follow streams to civilization. But every stream he found flowed uphill, water defying gravity, circling back to the clearing no matter which direction he chose. He ran until his lungs burned and his leg muscles screamed, and then he burst through undergrowth into another clearing. The same clearing. The altar, the candles, the cultists, all exactly where they'd been. He'd traveled in a circle despite moving in a straight line, just like his GPS had recorded earlier. The old woman stood by the altar, patient. "The forest knows you now, Ranger Ramirez. Chernunos has marked you. There's nowhere to run that isn't his domain." David tried his radio again. Dead. His phone, no signal, and the screen was glitching, showing impossible battery readings, the time jumping between 9:47 p.m. and 3:33 a.m. He pulled out his compass. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle on any direction. "This isn't possible," he said, more to himself than to them. "There's a rational explanation." "Is there?" The woman gestured to the forest around them. "Explain the paths that loop. Explain the candles that never burn down. Explain how we knew you'd come here today at this hour, because the god whispered your name in our dreams." David had no explanations. His framework for understanding reality was crumbling, and beneath it was something older and darker than his education had admitted existed. A sound rose from the forest. Not the cultists chanting, but something else. A horn, deep and resonant, like a hunting horn, but larger, older. The cultists fell silent, their expressions shifting from ceremonial focus to genuine awe and fear. "He comes," the woman whispered. "The Lord of the Forest, the horned god. Chernunos walks the solstice." The trees at the clearing's edge began to move, not swaying in wind but moving deliberately, branches reaching down like arms, roots pulling free of soil. And between the trees, something approached, something massive. It walked on two legs but was not human. 8 feet tall at least, body covered in coarse fur that might have been clothing or might have been skin. Its head was crowned with antlers, real antlers, 12 points, spanning 6 feet across. Its face was a skull, white bone, but the eyes in the sockets burned with green fire. In its hand it carried a staff carved with every symbol David had seen in the forest, and where the staff touched the ground, plants grew instantly, flowers blooming and dying in seconds. David's rational mind broke. This couldn't exist, couldn't be real. Was a hallucination brought on by fear or drugs slipped into his water, or a psychotic break from the stress of Derek's disappearance? Except he could smell it. Musk and earth and decay, the scent of deep forest where sunlight never reached. Could hear it, breath like wind through caves, footsteps that made the ground shake. Could feel it, power radiating from it like heat from a fire, reality bending around it the way air bends around flame. The entity that might have been a man in a costume, but wasn't spoke, and its voice was like rocks grinding together, like roots breaking stone. The mocker and the seeker both have found truth tonight. From behind the altar, two figures were brought forward by cultists. One was Derek Sullivan, alive but changed. His eyes had the same vacant quality as the cultists, the light of fanaticism replacing academic curiosity. The other was a woman David didn't recognize, middle-aged, terrified, clearly not a willing participant. "Dr. Sullivan sought the old ways," Chernunos said. "He has been granted understanding. He will serve." Derek's mouth moved, speaking in that same ancient language, his voice blending with the cultists' renewed chanting. "The mocker sought to destroy belief," Chernunos continued, its skull face turning toward David. "He will learn that some truths persist regardless of acceptance." The entity raised its staff, and the ground beneath David's feet erupted with growth. Vines shot up, wrapping around his legs, his torso, pulling him down. He fought, but they were impossibly strong, thorns piercing through his uniform into his skin. The bear spray was useless. His knife couldn't cut fast enough. Within seconds he was immobilized, only his head free, forced to watch as the ritual continued. The woman, the unwilling sacrifice, was placed on the altar. She screamed, fought, but the cultists held her down with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before. The man with the bronze sickle approached, speaking words that made David's ears hurt. syllables that human throats shouldn't be able to produce. David wanted to look away. Couldn't. The vines held his head in place, forced him to witness as the sickle descended, as blood flowed into the altar's channels, as the woman's screams cut off with terrible finality. The blood reached the edge of the altar and dripped onto the moss below, and where it fell, mushrooms sprouted instantly, pale and glowing with their own light. The believer's gift, Cernunnos intoned. Blood and life, offered freely or taken, sustains the cycle. The forest feeds on death and births new growth. The entity turned to David. And you, mocker, what will you offer? Your disbelief is its own gift. Arrogance is sweet to gods who remember when humans knew humility before the wild. David wanted to spit defiance to maintain his rationalism even in the face of impossibility. But he couldn't. His certainty was gone, shattered. He'd been wrong, catastrophically wrong. Folk beliefs weren't cognitive failures. They were survival mechanisms, warnings passed down from people who'd learned that some things in these mountains operated by rules older than science. I don't understand, he managed to say, his voice cracking. What are you? We are what remains when civilization forgets, Cernunnos said. We are the old gods, sleeping in sacred places, worshipped by those wise enough to remember. We are neither good nor evil, we simply are, as the forest is, as winter is, as death is. You sought to explain us away. Now you will help us return. The staff descended, touching David's forehead. Pain exploded through his skull, white hot and absolute. In that pain, David saw, actually saw, with a clarity that made his previous understanding seem like blindness. He saw the forest as it truly was, not a collection of trees and animals, but a living network, conscious and aware, with thoughts that moved like seasons and memories that spanned millennia. He saw the cultists not as fanatics, but as the latest in an unbroken line stretching back 3,000 years, each generation passing down knowledge that had been old when Rome was young. He saw Cernunnos and entities like it, not gods exactly, but something between deity and force of nature, manifestations of primal concepts given form by centuries of belief and blood sacrifice. And he saw Derek Sullivan, or what was left of him. The researcher's consciousness was still there, but subsumed into something larger. His individual identity dissolved into the collective worship. He'd sought truth and found it. But the truth was too vast for one mind to contain without being consumed by it. The vision released David, and he collapsed against the vines holding him upright. The entity withdrew its staff. You have seen. Now you choose. Join us. Become servant of the old ways. Help us wake the sleeping gods in every mountain, every forest, every wild place still untouched by your concrete and steel. Or resist and feed the forest, as all resistors eventually do. David looked at Derek, at the woman's body on the altar, at the cultists watching him with expressions that mixed hope and hunger. He looked at Cernunnos, at the impossible entity that violated every natural law he'd been taught to believe in. I choose option 3, David said, his voice steadier than he felt. He'd learned one thing in the Marines before joining the Park Service. When faced with impossible odds, change the parameters of engagement. David had something in his pocket that none of these people, with their ancient beliefs and pre-industrial tools, had considered: modernity. His hand found his road flare, standard SAR equipment. He'd used it to mark his position when the GPS failed. Now he used it as a weapon. He struck the cap and the flare burst into brilliant red flame, burning at 1,800 degrees. The vines holding him recoiled from the heat, their grip loosening. David ripped free, swinging the flare in wide arcs, the chemical fire sending cultists scrambling back. The old ways versus thermite, David shouted, his voice carrying manic energy. Let's see which is stronger. He threw the flare at the altar. It landed in the pooled blood and the blood ignited. Shouldn't have been possible. Blood doesn't burn like that. But nothing tonight followed rules David understood. Flames spread across the altar's surface, consuming the offerings, the wallet, the blood itself. Cernunnos roared, the sound shaking leaves from trees. The entity raised its staff, but David was already running, and this time he wasn't trying to escape through the forest. He was running toward the one thing he'd noticed earlier, a stream, one of the impossible streams that flowed uphill. Supernatural places operated by symbolic logic. Derek's research notes had said, what flows up might flow down if the symbols change. David pulled the Pulaski axe from his belt, standard firefighting equipment every ranger carried. He swung it at the nearest standing stone, the blade biting deep into the carved symbols. The stone cracked, split, fell. Immediately the stream's flow reversed, water rushing downhill as gravity reasserted itself. The clearing shuddered. The candles went out simultaneously, as if someone had thrown a switch. The chanting stopped, and Cernunnos began to fade, its form becoming translucent, the green fire in its eyes dimming. "No!" the old woman shrieked. "The circle! He's broken the circle!" David ran to the next stone and destroyed it. Then another. The cultists tried to stop him, but they moved like people underwater, their coordination lost, their ritual power draining away as the symbolic architecture collapsed. By the time David reached the fourth stone, Cernunnos was barely visible, a ghost of antlers and ancient fury, its voice a fading whisper. "We sleep again, mocker, but we do not die. And when you sleep, you will remember. You will always remember what you've seen." The entity vanished. The clearing returned to normalcy so abruptly it felt like waking from a dream. The altar just a moss-covered rock. The candles nothing but iron holders with melted wax. The robed cultists just confused people in handmade clothing, looking around as if uncertain how they'd gotten there. David's radio crackled to life. "Ramirez, this is base. What's your status? You've been off comms for 3 hours." 3 hours. David looked at his phone. 11:47 p.m. He'd entered the clearing at 8:30 p.m. or so he'd thought. Time had slipped, stretched, folded back on itself. "I've found Derek Sullivan," David said into the radio, "and about 15 people who need psychiatric evaluation, requesting immediate backup and medical assistance at my coordinates." Derek Sullivan recovered physically but not mentally. He was institutionalized at a private facility in Asheville, diagnosed with dissociative disorder brought on by exposure to unknown hallucinogenic compounds, the official explanation for what had happened. The other cultists were similarly treated, their shared delusion explained as mass hysteria combined with environmental factors. The woman's body was found at the altar site and ruled a homicide, her death attributed to the cult. Several members were charged with murder, though the cases stalled in legal limbo as defendants proved incompetent to stand trial. David wrote one final blog post. It was titled, "I Was Wrong," and it consisted of a single sentence. "Some beliefs are true, and some truths are more terrible than disbelief could ever protect you from." He took a medical leave from the Park Service, then resigned entirely. The forest wouldn't let him forget. Every tree looked like it might have faces in the bark. Every clearing might hide an altar. Every shadow might conceal something ancient and patient and infinitely hungry. He moved to Phoenix, Arizona, as far from forests and old places as he could get. He stopped writing the blog, deleted the posts debunking folk beliefs, ignored the emails from readers asking what had happened. But at night, he dreamed of antlers and green fire, of God sleeping in sacred places, of truth too vast for rational minds to hold without breaking. And he knew that Cernunnos had been right. He would remember. Always remember. That was his curse, payment for his arrogance. Some beliefs weren't superstition. Some truths operated by rules science hadn't discovered. And some gods didn't need belief to exist, they just needed to be forgotten long enough to gather power in the dark, waiting for the moment when skeptics like David would stumble into clearings where the old ways persisted and learn that rationality was a thin shield against the weight of centuries. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.